Well, hello there. My name is Ian, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So, joining me today is Mr. Jonathan Cornell from ImmersiveAudioAlbum.com. And as you can see, I'm wearing my very 1980s sports coat. That must mean that it's finally time to talk about Under Wraps by Jethro Tull. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about these new mixes, how they compare to the old mixes, and sort of how my opinion and perhaps even your opinion has evolved about this record over the years. I think we will talk in depth about the new multi-channel mixes, the Dolby Atmos mix for both this and the Walk Into Light solo album by Ian Anderson. So I guess I'll just open the conversation here by saying that I've been listening to this record since the 90s, and I've never hated it. Like that's probably my hot take, is that I've never hated it. I always felt that it was not the best Jethro Tull record, but it was also far from the worst. And at the very least, I always found it very interesting and aesthetically challenging for them. And there's a few songs on here that I've always really, really liked. Astronomy being one of them, which I know is a bonus track. Heat. The title tracks, both title tracks I've always really liked. And Nobody's Car. Always been huge favorites of mine. So coming into this new mix, I, of course, made a video that many of you may be aware of about a year and a half ago, where I kind of postulated what could be in an Under Wraps box set. And the elephant in the room when talking about this particular album is Ian Anderson's decision to use a drum machine as opposed to a live drummer. And I think that this is compounded by the fact that Don Perry enters, and he's Tull's most tenured drummer at like 25 years or something. I think everybody may have wanted a re-recording of the drums, but instead what we get, as per your excellent interview with the box mixer Bruce Soord, are drum triggers. So I guess we could start by, maybe you could explain to folks who may be Luddites what a drum trigger is and how it pertains to this box set.
Yeah, so essentially what they've done is, if you were to look at, I guess, the tapes for this album, you would see that, like, there's, per Bruce in the interview, the electronic drums were actually recorded over multiple tracks, which we wouldn't have guessed. No. I think he said it was the kick, snare, and then like everything else. There are 4 channels on the tape of drums. So they make these plugins now where, like, there's a plugin manufacturer called Steven Slate that makes one, which was the one I used to use when I was in, recording school. But it essentially scans like the transients, of the track once you're inside of a, in a DAW like Pro Tools or Logic, or I think Bruce uses Cubase, and it will allow you to replace the sound like with another drum sample. So essentially what you're getting is it maintains like the performance itself, like the pattern where the notes are placed, but the physical like sound of the drum hits is different.
Yeah.
So, and another way you could do this is you could convert audio to MIDI. So I'm not sure which method Bruce used, but yeah, it's essentially the same pattern, the same programming, but just different tone to the drum sounds.
Yeah. So the same performance, if you want to call it that. And as I had talked about in my initial video, the problem with replacing these tracks with a real drummer is that the songs were recorded live to the drum machine. And to take that drum machine out, I think would lose some of the essential feel. And I kind of got from your interview with Bruce that they tried.
Yeah, he
record a drummer for this.
He mentions this in there's like a little liner note essay in the book where he essentially says a lot of the same things that he told me in the interview, which is that they tried doing a drum replacement for one track and they didn't specify which song it was or who actually played on it, but apparently it was attempted and they decided that it didn't work.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably just because, like you had mentioned, they cut the album live to the electronic drums. Yes. So it's sort of like, you think of the whole album like it's like a Jenga tower. and like the drums are the thing at the bottom, and when you pull out the foundation, it all kind of like falls apart, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I could understand that, and I think when you listen to the album, I think it for me it worked well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm getting to that. I promise. I know that I'm taking the long way round, but
No, by all means, continue.
another thing to consider, and Don Perry talks about this in the liner notes, is that in the late stages of the recording of this album, they were still considering, recording his parts because he entered the picture about halfway through. But number one, Don Perry said he loves the programming, and number two, he says that in order to replace the drums, it might actually require a second drummer. And the way that they kind of worked around this for the live show is you have a combination of the drum machine and Doan playing acoustic as well as electronic drums to the drum machine. So I don't think, I guess all this to say is that everybody who wanted to have somebody like a Gavin Harrison or somebody like that come in and bash these parts out, my opinion is they went the right route here. Looping back to what I said before about this not being one of my favorite Jethro Tull albums, thanks to Bruce's work with the drum replacement, as well as what I think is an outstanding Dolby Atmos mix, this has raised this album a few bars in my ranking, and I may actually put it ahead of Broadsword now, which I wouldn't have, like, say 20 years ago. And I'll just start by saying that my impression is that the new drum sounds, the triggers, remove the harshness of the original drum samples, and it removes the monotony of the drum samples. And what this does is it takes away the distraction of the drum programming and allows me to hear the band's performance better. And I think that's a resounding success in my book.
Yeah, so I think for me, as someone coming to this album fairly newer, than you said you've been listening to it since the 90s. The first time I heard this album was probably like during the pandemic, maybe. Mm-hmm. But when I listen to the original mix, I think there's kind of two core issues. I think one of them is it feels like the drum machine is like a few feet in front of the band.
Yeah.
Like it's like the drum machine is like way in the forefront hammering away, and the band is like a couple feet behind it. Like that's kind of the impression I get listening to it. And the other problem is that the bass guitar is mixed really low.
Yeah.
Like it's there to the point where you could hear him like phrasing the notes, but there's like no like sub bass impact.
Yeah.
And Bruce mentioned this when I interviewed him and in that liner note essay, that was just kind of like an 80s thing. Yep. That you could hear in other sort of contemporary, music from the era. And I think, as you said, the remix addresses both those problems. The drum sounds are less harsh and kind of punchier and more balanced with the rest of the band. And I think the best part is that Dave Pegg's bass is like, right up there in the forefront, and you can really hear what he's doing. And I think putting those two, just those two adjustments, like it gives the album this like sort of visceral power. Like the songs are finally like exciting to listen to. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it was a huge success.
Yeah, and especially like last night, I started out by sampling some of Broadsword and the Beast, Steven Wilson's, in my opinion, excellent surround mix. And switching over to this was just night and day. Like this music was grabbing me in a way that even the Broadsword mix doesn't. And that's coming from somebody who's always historically preferred the Broadsword and the Beast album. But yeah, I mean, by reducing the monotony of the drum machine and making the drum sound softer, I also noticed, and this really impresses me, that especially on the Walk in Delight album, it seems like Bruce was able to bring some dynamics back into the drum machine. And I'm guessing that velocity thing was something that he would have had to enter because the dynamics move naturally with the band. And like going back to the original drum mixes, which I know some people are going to prefer, I think this becomes very painfully obvious. And I know we're bleeding over into Walk in Delight a little bit, But the other night, I decided that I was going to listen to the original drum mix of Under Wraps, and then I went to bed and I took my headphones with me and I was going to listen to Walk in Delight, and I found it so distracting to have that machine going constantly that I almost immediately switched over to the 2026 stereo mix of Walk in Delight and just drifted off into a beautiful dream. I mean, it makes this music, and I always did prefer Walk in Delight, but it makes both of these albums so much more palatable to me.
Well, I think I should mention as well that one of the reasons why I think Bruce was such a good fit for this project is because he has so much experience triggering drums.
Correct.
So if you're familiar with his band, The Pineapple Thief, for the original iteration, that band started in 1999. It wasn't really like a band; it was just him, and he would program the drums for all their albums up until maybe like 2009 or 2010. So I think he got really good at like sort of simulating the drums. And in 1999, like the trigger technology was nothing compared to what they have now. So
yeah.
And for his solo records, he still does the drums electronically. So I think that was sort of an interesting bit of serendipity that this was the album that needed the drum replacement, and they got the guy who has like decades of experience doing electronic drums.
Yeah, he's perfect for this album, and he clearly appreciates this era of Tull's music, based on his interviews. So I'm all on board with Bruce as the mixer for this project as well as future Tull albums. But what I noticed right away with these surround mixes is that constantly every speaker is in use. And I'm on a 5.1.2 system. You're on a, what's your array?
714.
714. So you have like front and back heights and sides and some ceilings.
Yep. Yeah, so front and back heights and sides.
Well, the experience that I have is constantly all of my speakers are engaged, and there's constantly stuff panning around, even from the opening of the album. Like I hear toms being placed in the heights, which seems really strange, but it works for this album because of all of Tull's records, this is the most like, say, a Kraftwerk album, where you don't have to necessarily ground the mix in a traditional way. You can just take these elements and just put them around where they seem to fit. I also noticed that Ian's vocals are processed in a way that is very, very flattering, and I can discern his lyrics so much better than what I'm used to hearing. I also noticed that we get a heck of a lot more Dave Pegg, pretty much all the time, to the point where I can probably sing a lot of his bass lines now, and I couldn't before. But perhaps the most important element to me is the balance between Peter John Vitessi's keyboards and Martin Barr's guitar is so much better than in the original mix. And I love, because Martin Barr has often said this is like his favorite Jethro Tull album, and
yeah,
now I understand why.
I remember reading that, and then like I listened to the original mix, and I was like, he's mixed kind of low on it. Like I'm surprised, like he has such flattering things to say about this album. But yeah, when you hear the new version, it all makes sense. I agree.
Yeah, and because and I was thinking about Rush and how Alex Lifeson always felt like he was being displaced by the keyboards in the 80s, but I feel that Alex was able to use that disadvantage to become more creative. In my opinion, Martin Barr was embracing that, and he was just coming up with some of his most imaginative work to date. And I love that we're able to hear more of him. I love the fact that we can hear more of the Tull guys, and that's why when looking at some of the criticisms that I've read online, I'm a little bit baffled, because anything that allows me to hear more of the humans playing the music, I'm hugely in favor of.
Yeah. Well, to sort of take it back to the whole beginning, the idea of the surround mixes. I mean, when I first heard this record, even though like I didn't really like the sound of it, I hoped that they would eventually get to this one in the reissues, because it might be the one that feels like it's most suited for surround. I mean, I think all the albums have been to a degree. I mean, some of the early ones, like maybe it's kind of questionable, like This Was and Stand Up, though I think Stand Up had a pretty nice mix.
Stand Up's pretty good.
Considering it was recorded on 8-track, I think, that album.
Yeah.
But this one in particular, I think there was like really an opportunity to do something wild. And I had the honor of getting to test the surround mixes for this album. So this goes back to September, October of 2025. I got to hear some of the early versions that Bruce did, and a couple of my ideas made it into the final version. And it was like a really fun one to test, because you could suggest like all these ridiculous things, like in the song Under Wraps, like there's like that marimba sound that Peter's playing.
Yeah,
there's
that's neat.
like, why don't you take that and like spin it around the heights? And he was like, okay, let's do it. Or Lap of Luxury, like putting the toms in the heights. Like you would never do that on a regular album, but because they're all, because it's all from the drum machine and they're like these discrete parts, you could do all this weird stuff. And yeah, Kraftwerk, I think, is a good comparison. All the like weird call and response things with the vocals.
Yes.
Like in the song Under Wraps, of course it goes front to back like you would expect. On some of the other songs, there's enough different vocal parts that they come from like the back and the ceiling. Like in Heat is a good example from that. Like the harmony is in the rear, and then those other sort of vocals that pop in during the verse are in the heights. So in every song, there are all these like really interesting creative things happening with the keyboards and vocals in particular. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned this when I posted about it on a forum that we're both on, but it's like it feels like the album was always supposed to sound like this. Mm-hmm. And like every version you've heard up until now was just like a compromise of the technology they had at the time or the budget or whatever. And people debate all the time about the merits of mixing old albums in Atmos. Like, is this really what the artist intended? Like, is it revisionist? But I think if they had Atmos in 1984, they would have mixed this album like this.
Yeah, they would have. And it's weird, but it seems like now at this moment, this particular album feels more modern to me than some of the others. And I think that's because 80s music is coming back at the moment.
I also think, like you mentioned, Grace Under Pressure is kind of a good comparison point. The other album I was thinking of while listening to it was A Momentary Lapse of Reason. Like examples of these sort of bands that were doing like quote unquote progressive music in the 70s, trying to introduce like 80s production into their music. And all three of those albums, like there's a segment of the fan base that likes them and there's a segment that doesn't. And all of them have been remixed over the last couple of years. So they've done Momentary Lapse of Reason. I think in 2019, there was a reissue of it. Yep. They just recently did Grace Under Pressure, both in Atmos and with a new stereo mix. And I think this is easily the most successful of the three in terms of the remix raising my opinion of the album. Funny enough, for Momentary Lapse of Reason, they actually did record acoustic drums over the... Right. And I think it didn't work that well on that album. So, I mean, I'm not really getting at anything in particular here. It's interesting that all those albums have been revisited. I mean, I also think this is just like a more invented album than A Momentary Lapse of Reason. And it has more of like the... it has more of the usual kind of creative flair and that sort of thing that, that Ian Anderson brings to all these albums. Whereas I think Momentary Lapse of Reason, it sort of loses some of that core thing that you like about Pink Floyd, at least for me. I know some people like that album. But I mean, I think more so maybe than any other album, certainly in this series, this is the one where the remix really changed my opinion of the record.
Same here. And to me, it makes it a much warmer, more inviting, punchier album. And, I do hear more of what makes Tull Tull.
Yes.
Like, who knew there were mandolins in Radio Free Moscow? Like,
and that
blew my mind to hear that.
And that was one of the things I didn't like about the album when I first heard it. Because you think about an album like Broadsword, I think there's like a pretty good balance of like the old sound and the new sound.
There is.
Like you have like the mandolins and Falling on Hard Times, all the like little acoustic bits in the clasp. And I think it sort of melds with the synthesizers very well. Then when I listened to this album, it felt like it went too far the other way.
Right. Like
it was kind of like all these keyboards and things, and then there'd be like a little flourish of flute in one of the songs, like just to remind you that it's Tull.
Yeah.
But I guess that's just a result of the way they balance things in the original mix. Because when you listen to it in this version, like you said, you start to hear like, oh, like there's more connective tissue between this album and Broadsword than I initially thought, which makes sense because it's all the same guys playing on it, right?
Well, yeah, with the exception of Jerry Conway.
Yes, obviously, but I mean, Peter was on Broadsword as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just to touch on Broadsword for just a second, I do think that Jerry Conway was a departure in terms of Tull drummers because he's not nearly as showy as Barrymore Barlow was, and I love Barry Barlow for that. But that's sort of the premise that Jerry was hired on, is that he was rock solid and kind of would simplify the arrangements a little bit. So I feel like, and of course Ian was experimenting with the drum machine back on the Broadsword sessions, and songs like Watching Me, Watching You, which kind of sound that way. But my point being is that I think that Ian was looking to kind of simplify and have a more rock solid drumming style. So it makes sense that he would introduce the drum machine at this point.
Well, it's just sort of a different philosophy of making an album, or it's the complexity lies in a different part of the process. So like you think about the older albums, what made them impressive to me is like the sort of the instrumental performances, like the guys jamming.
Yeah.
And then I think in this one, it was kind of like the idea was we want to have like a really rock solid like backing track. And then we can do all this crazy stuff with layering the vocals and the keyboards. So it's just kind of like, I mean, it was the same process in the sense that they cut the tracks live, albeit to the drum machine. It wasn't like they built the record one layer at a time, which is the way a lot of albums are made now. But yeah, I think in the older albums, there was not as much attention paid to like, painstakingly punching in all these different vocals and all these intricate things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Ian says in the booklet that he thinks this is his best vocal performance in the studio.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because there are, just kind of coming, around back to the Atmos discussion, there are moments in this where I feel like Ian Anderson is standing in every corner of my room, singing or shouting or snarling or doing something. And like the ending of Apogee comes to mind with the hup, 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 that just kind of bubbles around like my front array, which is really interesting.
You could just like picture him sitting in the studio, like just with the tape machine going like, yeah.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I can't imagine how long it took to do all these vocals.
Yeah.
And in the original, like you can tell there are a lot of vocals, but when you listen to it in a room with like 10 speakers and there's like a different vocal in each speaker, I mean, it's wild.
It is.
It's gotta be, easily my favorite Atmos mix I've heard this year. And I think I might put it up there as far as like vintage remixes go. It could be in my top 5 or my top 10. I mean, that list is always changing as more reissues come out. But yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. I think if you have an Atmos setup, like the jump from the 5.1 mix, which is pretty good too, to hearing it in Atmos, like it reveals that much more.
Yeah, well, I didn't have a chance to listen to the 5.1 mix much, but I did start with the stereo remix, and that leap was just enormous. Like when I listened to the stereo remix, I kind of get why some people who are just listening to the stereo mix might be a little underwhelmed, because it is so different from what we're used to hearing. But I liked it because this is always an album that I didn't necessarily want to sound exactly the same way it did 40 years ago. I wanted the mixer to take chances with it. And going from the 26 drum stereo mix to the Atmos mix is just like opening the door to another world for me.
I mean, there's parts of it where like it sounds like you're in this, like you think about a song like Automotive Engineering, like you're in some bizarre like machine world, like you're in like in Star Wars, there's like the droid factory. Like that's what I feel like I'm inside of when I'm listening to that song in Atmos. So I think
down machines making machines.
I think if you're someone who buys these reissues purely for the stereo versions and the surround is just kind of like an extra thing on the set that you don't really listen to, I think this is the one that I think should spur a lot of people to try to set up a surround system. Because it really makes the record like that much more interesting.
Agreed. Yeah. Agreed. And I'm glad you also mentioned automotive engineering, because there was a time where I would have put that at the bottom of my Tull songs. Like, it was one of my probably most despised Tull songs. And it's now one of my favorites on the record, because just the inventiveness of the mixing. And I know we are talking about kind of bonus selection here. But yeah, that's one of the tracks in particular that has raised up to a much more favorable rating for me. Now, moving on to Walk into Light, and I think we will talk about the extras just kind of in their own section.
Sure.
But moving on to Walk into Light, this is a rather interesting for me, because I always have loved this album, and I actually, and still do, I think I like it better than Under Wraps. Like, I think I mentioned to you in a private message that if Under Wraps is the extroverted album, then Walk into Light is the introverted album.
Yeah, well, the first thing I noticed when I first heard these two records a few years ago is that the production on Under Wraps is like more gimmicky. Like, there's a lot of the like sort of the stuttery vocals and all these like those like 80s cliches. Like, they really leaned into that stuff on Under Wraps. And it only seems like cliche now. Like, at the time it was probably like super cutting edge, contemporary.
Innovative.
And I think Walk into Light seems less dated. It's particularly the original mix, because it doesn't have a lot of that stuff. Like, and the drum sound on Walk into Light has always been better than Under Wraps. I mean, I still think there's a big improvement going to the triggered version, but the original mix of Walk into Light, I think, was better than the one for Under Wraps. That seems to be the general consensus among fans. Yeah.
I would agree with that. But, this is an album that I think challenged Jethro Tull fans aesthetically when it came out, because I think Tull fans wanted an Ian Anderson solo album to be like some of the solo tracks that were on Jethro Tull albums, like Mother Goose or Cheap Day Return, or even One White Duck from Minstrel in the Gallery. And so, in other words, acoustic guitar, voice, flute, they wanted that very, folksy thing. But as Ian puts it, he sort of saw what was going on, around him with all these samplers and machines and programming. And he said, well, I could give this a shot, or I could be left in the dust. So I would prefer to try this new technology. But I never felt that way about Walk into Light in particular. And especially in listening to these new mixes, it dawned on me that had he recorded them on acoustic guitars instead of electric pianos and sequencers and samplers, it would have sounded a lot like Secret Language of Birds. Because the essential essence of Ian Anderson's songwriting permeates this entire record for me. There's one or two songs that I think could have been on any of his albums. But going into the new mix here, this is one where, believe it or not, I think the differences in the triggers mattered the most to me. And I had mentioned to that a little bit prior, that I found it difficult to kind of relax into this album listening to the original drum mix. But this is particular, I think, where the dynamics make a huge difference. On a song like Different Germany, when you hear those toms just kind of gently coming in your front speakers, I forgot that it was programmed drums. I thought that was Doane, like just listening to it. It sounded so natural to me.
Yeah, I mean, across both albums, like the triggered drum sound, like, sounds more like an acoustic kit than the original one. The original one has that, like, particularly Under Wraps, that like fly swatter sound.
Yeah.
Like, it's just super synthetic. And like, some people would argue like maybe that's what they were going for. Like, it was supposed to sound very mechanical. But I think in retrospect, with these new sounds, the sort of more acoustic, it makes the material, easier on the ears, I think.
Yeah.
More so on Under Wraps than Walk into Light. But yeah, no, I think the songwriting is great. I think I don't know which album I like better, but I mean, there are a lot of songs on Walk into Light I think are great. Made in England is one of my favorites. User Friendly, and the alternate version of User Friendly is awesome.
It is.
Yeah.
which
I saw I saw in the forum some people were like, why didn't they use that version? And I kind of get why he changed it to the one that's on the album, but that alternate one was cool to hear, and in surround
yeah,
too.
almost new wave inspired,
Yeah.
in my opinion. But yeah, I definitely feel like this mix, well, it's a much sparser album to begin with, more open spaces because it's just Ian and Peter John Batesi playing all the parts.
And the vocal production is less elaborate than it is on
Yes.
Unwrapped. There's not like there aren't parts in the sound where there's like, you know, four voices hitting you from different directions.
Right.
Like usually just during the choruses, like there's some doubling or something. But yeah, it's simpler, and certainly in stereo that makes it a little less fatiguing.
Yeah.
I mean, in surround, you know, that stuff was great on Unwrapped, but I think still in the surround mix, there's, you know, plenty to play with on this album.
Yeah.
You know, it's parts with moving keyboards. On a couple of the songs, like Peter's using like a string kind of sample, like on Fly By Night. That's often mixed to the back. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I noticed that too. And yeah, a lot of Peter John Batesi's vocal parts hadn't really jumped out at me before, but you can hear them very clearly.
So like black and white television.
Yeah. Those really high.
It's sort of run through like a vocoder or something, and you hear it you hear it chanting behind you. Yeah, that was cool.
Yep, that's Peter. If you listen back to the live show that's on Broadsword and the Beast, you can pick him out really well on Flying Colors because he has that boy falsetto ending. He actually owns up to being that's his voice. He owns up to that in the liner notes here. So it's very easy for me to pick him out now because he's got a very distinctly higher voice than Ian's. But yeah, I would almost, and I'd be curious your thoughts on this, but I could almost slot this album into a listen of some of Brian Ferry's 80s work, like Avalon or Boys and Girls, because it's kind of in that similar, just sort of chill nighttime mode. And it's a much more intimate sounding album. And I think that the Atmos mix reflects that. But I've always liked sparser Atmos mixes just as much as I liked crazy ones. So it's nice to have like the yin and yang here with this set.
And also like they didn't have to put Walk Into Light on this set.
No.
So I'm glad like it's there and it got the same attention that Unwrapped did. If all this set had was the Unwrapped mix in Atmos and 5.1 in stereo and nothing else, like I would still consider that a win.
Sure. Yeah. I agree with that.
And it'll be interesting, you know, going forward if they do more pairings in the series. You know, I know we've speculated like .com and Secret Language of Birds would be a good combination.
Yeah, especially since those sessions are actually more closely tied together. I think a lot of Secret Language of Birds and .com were recorded at the same time with many of the same musicians. Like I think Giddings and Martin play on Secret Language of Birds. Whereas these two albums, you know, Walk in Delight was very much done in 1983 during Tull's touring break. Whereas Unwrapped, that was developed late 83 throughout 84, and it had its own sort of ethos, like you said, about how they would get together and hash out these backing tracks and then would elaborate them on them in the studio, which is one reason why, you know, these demos that are included are so interesting because you can kind of hear some of the rejected Unwrapped demos.
I was just going to say another part of it too is that since Ian was working in a home studio now, like, you know, he could spend as much time as he wanted, you know, punching in stuff on top of these tracks. It wasn't like they were billing you by the hour and you had to get out of there. I think that was probably something that affected some of the earlier Tull albums.
Definitely.
Like, you know, when you're in the studio, like you're on the clock. Yeah. Whereas, you know, for this, he could spend as much time as he wanted tracking vocals and refining things. And I think that's another reason why particularly the Unwrapped album is the way it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I agree. Let's talk about the bonus tracks.
Well, I'll start by talking about the Unwrapped bonus selection. And so we have two songs here. Well, actually, if you count the Lap of Luxury demo version, and the Unwrapped intro, we have 5. But I guess you did have a thought about the Lap of Luxury demo version.
Only that, like, it's missing a lot of stuff. Like the
Yeah.
basic structure of the song is there, but it doesn't have a lot of like the little keyboard flourishes and things that. So I wonder if people who think, like, I've seen a criticism of this album is that there's like too many keyboard parts crammed in. Like I wonder if that hearing it that way like made it work better for you. I mean, it was different. Like it's not as different as the other user friendly version. Like you could
No.
tell it's kind of like an in progress version of what we got. But I think it was cool that they put it out. It was cool they got to hear it in surround, and the way the instruments were placed in the surround mix is actually different than the studio version, which was kind of cool too.
Yep. Yep. And but I mean the real draw to these sets for a lot of people are the tracks that we've never heard before. And we get two kind of main ones here with the Under Wraps sessions, and that's Bring Back the Waltz and Her Love Is Strange. And with Bring Back the Waltz, I was almost getting like an 80s Donald Fagen vibe. Like I could see this fitting on like the Nightfly or Gaucho, which was rather interesting. It's not something I really expected from him.
Yeah. I mean, and also like what other band has this many bonus tracks?
Yeah.
Seriously,
Exactly.
like
Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, not to mention the 4 bonus tracks that are kind of legacy bonuses: Astronomy, Tundra, Automotive Engineering, and General Crossing. And Astronomy is actually one of my very favorite songs from this album, because it on every version of this album that I've heard before. I've got this one, which is the 1984 release, and I also have the very terrible and botched 2005 remaster. But every version of these albums I've had, Astronomy and Tundra are in the middle of the album. So it's like when I talk about them as bonus tracks, it's kind of like my brain's got to jump through hoops to get there. But
So just sort of showing my lack of knowledge about this album until recently, like how were those songs released originally? Like Astronomy, Tundra?
They were released on the Lap of Luxury single.
So like B-sides. Okay.
B-sides, yeah. And I only just recently learned that myself. And then the Under Wraps album came out in September of 84. And then it came out on CD in 85. So when I said this is the 84 original, it actually came out in 85. My bad.
If you had the original vinyl or CD pressing of Under Wraps, you would not get those songs.
Well, this is the original pressing that came out in early 85. The vinyl didn't have those 4 tracks. The only way to hear those 4 tracks on vinyl was to buy the Lap of Luxury single, which came out back then. But they're slotted right into the middle of the album. Astronomy's after Radio Free Moscow, and Tundra is right before Nobody's Car. So it's like where you would flip the LP, those 2 songs are stuck there. And then Automotive Engineering and General Crossing are after Apogee. And I forgot to mention, but Apogee is my favorite song. This surround mix actually brings Apogee closer to the live versions that I'm used to hearing, and I like it so much better than I used to. So that's one thing I did forget to mention in our surround discussion.
It's interesting to think about, because like on a lot of albums, like for me, sometimes like there's 1 or 2 songs that like clearly benefit more from surround than the rest.
Yeah.
I just find that happens a lot. But in this album, like I don't really know like what was the best track in surround. Like I keep thinking about it, like maybe it was Heat, maybe it was Paparazzi, maybe it was Apogee. Like even the acoustic Under Wraps 2 is great in surround, with the guitars all around you and the voices coming from different places. So I think like every track is great in surround.
Every track is great in surround. Paparazzi is one that I kind of overlooked for a long time, but it's a great Martin riff. And
that part with the vocals, like the take it,
yeah, it's catchy. It gets stuck in your head like mad. And like something like Saboteur, where there's that repetitive bass part that I always thought was like a program kick drum or something, but it sounds like it's either a program part that Vitesse added, or it's something that Dave is actually playing on bass, but it unmuddies that mix so I can actually hear what's going on. But back to the extras for just a second. Astronomy's always been one of my favorite tracks on the album. And to hear that guitar thrown from the back to the front heights at the opening is what I always dreamed of for this track.
Yeah. And on the Walk Into Light side, I think In Dark Tunnels is a great tune.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's my favorite of the Walk into Light extras. Now, with Walk into Light, we get Raincoat Man and Clean Away, which are the same backing tracks but with different lyrics. In Dark Tunnels, Elizabeth and White, and user friendly version 1. Now, you mentioned earlier that are you saying you prefer the version 1 of user friendly, or do you just like it a lot?
No, I just like it. I mean, I'm not sure I have a clear preference one or the other, but yeah, I thought it was really cool and surprisingly different from the final one.
Yeah, and there's like a line that's edited or something into the beginning of the song about coming from the back door or walking through the back door, and that comes at the back of your head, which is I think a really creative choice. But yeah, it's almost like new wave. Like some of this stuff, some of the Unwrapped material, like borders on Thomas Dolby. And I was kind of hearing in the user friendly original version, like, oh, this arrangement could have fit on Unwrapped's album if they really wanted it to. So that's definitely one of the more interesting bonus cuts for sure.
I mean, to me, like the thing you said, like, you know, if there's some lyric about like something coming from behind your head and it comes up behind, like that's the way you're supposed to use surround.
Right.
Like I feel like people are often talk about these things like, oh, like, you know, you have to be careful, like that you're not messing with like the way the musicians would be standing on stage. Like, you know, you can't pull this apart because those parts were meant to be stacked on top of each other. I think that stuff doesn't matter as much as like things that the music suggests.
Right.
So like you think about, there's a track on, I forget if it's on Under Wraps. I think it's like later that same evening.
Yes.
It starts with that like droning synth. Mm-hmm. And it's like, why shouldn't that like droning part slowly fade from the front to the back? Like it's
right.
just sort of reinforcing the effect it's supposed to have in the original version.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, surround mix is really good.
Yeah, I don't know how many other ways we can say just that, but yeah, I mean, you just made me think of something with later that same evening, that sequencer, that bloop-a-doop-a-doop, that just kind of floats around and pans. Like it's everything that honestly that I hoped it would be and more. And it honestly surprised even me how much I enjoyed it. And it'll be interesting because eventually I am going to do a Tull ranking, and it'll be interesting to see where this lands for me. Because right now, I tend to agree with you that if not the best, it's definitely one of the best Tull surround mixes to date.
Yeah. And, you know, like Bruce said in the liner notes, like taking over for Steven Wilson, that's got to be a daunting task, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of expectation.
And I wonder, like, had Steven done it, like, how different would it have been? Would the mix have been just as aggressive, less so? Like, I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
Well, go ahead. Sorry.
Because Bruce's, like, his way of placing things in surround is pretty different from Steven's. Yeah. I mean, one of the biggest differences I noticed in this album versus any of the other Tull surround mixes is that the vocals are not only in the center channel.
Right.
Bruce's method is to do more of like a kind of spread across the front and the center. Yeah. Whereas on a lot of the Steven ones, like you listen to Broadsword before this, the vocals like very isolated in the center channel. And I know some people like that, some people don't. I think when you're sitting in the right place, it doesn't really make that much of a difference, I find, if you have everything set correctly. But even like with the whole Atmos piece of it, like a sort of signature thing that Bruce does that I find interesting is he places a lot of things like sort of between the bottom and the top. Mm-hmm. Like in this album, you could hear like sometimes the main drums are like up a little bit.
Yep, elevated. Yeah. Yep, especially Lap of Luxury.
Yeah. Well, there's also like some parts of the drums and that like the toms are like very much only in the tops.
Yeah. Yep.
And yeah, it's just kind of a different way that everything is placed, and I think it worked really well on this album. But like, I don't know how well that would have worked on like Aqualung, you know?
Sure.
So it's different philosophies, different ways of, and that's one of the things I find interesting about surround music or immersive music or whatever you want to call it.
It's about the right mixer for the right album, I think. And Bruce was by far the right mixer, I think, for this record. Now, a thought that just popped into my head a moment ago when you were saying, what would this sound like if Steven Wilson had mixed it? Well, if they end up doing the next Frankie Goes to Hollywood record, which is, what's that one called?
I think it's called Liverpool.
Liverpool. Well, take a peek at the credits. Peter John Vitesse is on that album, so I mean that might be like the closest we could get to what it would sound like. Because I was thinking of the Frankie album a little bit when listening to this, and there's even a note in the liner notes that the video for Lap of Luxury and The Power of Love both dropped like on the same day. on MTV or something like that. So they're contemporaries of each other for sure.
Dare I say, like, there's parts of Unwrapped that made me think of like the Future Bites.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I think the whole idea of that album was supposed to be kind of like an homage to music from this era, from like the sort of early to mid 80s. Yeah.
So, usually this is the part where we talk about what would we like to see next from the Tull camp, from Bruce Soord and his involvement with Future Tull Records. And I'm going to make this very easy, but I would like all of them. All of them that are left. And that includes Crest of a Knave, which I don't like as well as this album, but it makes me wonder if Bruce could raise my opinion of some aspects of it.
Yeah, so I've been listening to that, to refresh my memory of it lately, having now heard the new Under Wraps. And I think certainly he could help some of the more like mechanical sounding songs, like Steel Monkey in particular.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we're getting .com,
as
has been revealed by Ian, and that is kind of like the opposite of Under Wraps. Like, it's a pretty organic sounding album with all real drums, a lot of acoustic guitars, and assuming it is Bruce that ends up doing that, I would think it will be. Then it'll be interesting to see how that ends up sounding in 5.1 in Atmos. But I think some of them I've never heard, like Catfish Rising, I've still never listened to. Like, I have to go ahead and just listen to some of these records to get a sense. But the one I'm kind of the most excited for, because you turned me on to it, was Roots to Branches. I think that album rocks.
Yeah, that's my favorite late stage Tull record by far. And I saw the tour. I won't tell you how old I was, but I saw that tour, and it made a huge and lasting impression on me as a young person. So that's the one I'm most jazzed for. I hope that they're able to get to Roots to Branches. And that's another example where pairing that album with Divinity's, Ian Anderson's solo album of the same year, would make a lot of sense because they share a lot of musical similarities. And then also, as I'd kind of mentioned to you privately, you may notice Ian Anderson always works with an arranger. And this is because he's largely self-taught as a musician, a musical genius, but he needs somebody to kind of put his ideas into context and add more musicality to them. And, Peter John Vitesse is his arranger here. You could say Dee Palmer is the 70s arranger. Andy Giddings was the arranger by the time of Roots to Branches and Divinities, and his stamp is all over both of those records. So it'd make a lot of sense to put those together. And there was the Divinities tour. Unlike Walk in Delight, Ian Anderson did do a solo tour of Divinities, and it's long been a holy grail of mine to get a copy of that show, because they broke out some really unique Tull tracks like Dun Ringel on that tour.
But yeah, I think it's almost a certainty that they'll do Crest, right?
Yeah.
That album was, I don't know, it was kind of like a comeback hit for them, sort of, at the time.
Well, they won a Grammy for it.
Well,
against
of course.
Metallica.
Yes.
So
but I think from like a sales perspective, it performed better than Under Wraps and maybe even Broadsword, if I have that right. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And there should be some tasty extras with that one as well. Like, for instance, Budapest started its life as a 20-minute song and initially included bits of the song Mountain Men. Like,
funny enough, if you've seen on the Quadraphonic Quad forum, Stephen W. Taylor mentioned that he did a mix of Budapest, and then like Ian ended up like rejecting that and using his own.
Yeah,
I think he did some work on that album. I think the final mix of Steel Monkey might have been the one that he did.
He's credited as Stephen Taylor, but he's credited. I was just poring over the liner notes of that album not too long ago. But I guess I'll just wrap it up by saying that by saying that Rock Island, I know Bruce said on your interview that he's got a great deal of affection for that album. And that's maybe my least favorite. I mean, Rock Flute's maybe my least favorite, but um, that's maybe my least favorite of like the Tull albums with Martin is Rock Island. And what I think Bruce's talent is, and maybe what the impression I'd like to leave our viewers with, is Bruce's talent is for taking Tull music that I don't love and showing me its inherent beauty. And given his passion for the album Rock Island, I would really love to see him get a shot at it and see if he can convince me, convince me with it. I would like to give him that chance. And then, Catfish, sure, I'll take them all. I'll take all of them they can give us.
I mean, he convinced me on Under Wraps. Like when I first heard it, like I really didn't like it. So yeah. No, it's an exciting time to be a Tull fan for sure. Mm-hmm. I mean, who knew they would even make it to reissuing some of these albums? Like, remember when they were saying the last one that Steven was going to do would be Stormwatch? Yeah. And I think everybody wondered, like, would they even bother doing these sets for the albums after that? And yeah, I think, if you follow the comments, online, Under Wraps was kind of the one like a lot of people were asking for yes. Going back years. Because like we were saying, it's the one where I think like issues with the original production, the original mix made it harder to appreciate the music, at least from my perspective. And yeah, I mean, what a great reappraisal of this album, that this I think it's kind of like an underappreciated gem in the catalog.
Yeah. And there's just nothing else in the music world that sounds anything like these two albums. I mean, we've compared them to Thomas Dolby or to maybe some Brian Ferry stuff. Frankie Goes to Hollywood. I think you even mentioned maybe Steven Wilson's solo work, but
I know some people have compared them to like early 80s Ultravox, and like I don't really hear that.
I don't hear that
much.
either.
Yeah.
I think Ultravox were just label mates of theirs. They were both on Crystal, so it's kind of like an easy comparison. But there's nothing else like this. And to me, this album Under Wraps only fails if you're expecting it to sound like Songs from the Wood. If you compare it in its context and compare it to the Walk in Delight album, there's a lot of really great songs to discover here and some really inventive arrangements and performances. Sure, it's, as you say, gimmicky, but it's fun. And I think that's what people need to embrace about this is that it's a fun mix. And I wanted to remind folks as we're winding down here that I will leave a Amazon link in the description that if you purchase this box set, which Jonathan and I strongly encourage you to do so, it does benefit the channel in a very small way. And I would appreciate that greatly. I also wanted to remind folks that if you aren't subscribed to our channels, if you go to the subscribe bar, both of our channels are going to come up. Something like 60 or 70% of my viewers aren't subscribed. So make sure that you are, and also go give Jonathan a sub while you're at it too. There's an excellent interview on his channel where he talks with Bruce Soord about the mixing of these albums. And I highly implore you, in fact, go watch that as a companion to our review today.
And I would mention on top of that if you've never heard of Bruce Soord before, if you're just hearing about him now through his work on these Tull reissues, I would definitely check out his own music, both with the Pineapple Thief and under his own name. I think the Pineapple Thief are one of my favorite like contemporary bands now. They're fantastic. I've seen them live twice. I've got all their records. They're really, really good. So if you haven't checked them out, please do.
And there is a new Bruce solo album out called Ghosts in the Park, which I will also link in the description. But I think the plan is for us to review that at some point. So stick around.
Yeah. Funny enough, it came out on the same day as the Under Wraps reissue.
Yeah. Yeah. And I noticed that people were buying that album almost as much as they were buying Under Wraps from the affiliate link. So I'm excited to hear it. But until then, Jonathan, did you have any closing thoughts?
I think we've covered it pretty well. I'm a little sad we're not going to be able to talk about this album anymore. I feel like we've talked about it so many times in like preview videos and things. So, but yeah, I mean, just like A+ reissue. Like, I think I mean, maybe the only thing I could complain about, I guess really there's kind of two things that were both kind of, for one thing, it would have been cool to have the original drums in surround just to hear what it sounded like. I think that would have been kind of cool. I think at the end of the day, I probably would have just kept listening to the 2026 drums over that anyway. Yeah. And then the other thing that other people have mentioned is that the live show is incomplete.
Yeah, that bothers me. Yep, I won't lie. And actually, I've specifically avoided talking too much about that because I do intend to do a follow-up video with my friend Jocko, who my subscribers should be aware of because we've reviewed other Tull releases together. But he and I are going to really get into some of the more frustrating aspects of this release. So if you're purely like a stereo head and you're screaming at me, why didn't you talk about the live stuff? I'm going to, and I definitely do have opinions about that. But yeah, I'm happy with the package overall. I think that the new mixes are really where it's at. The original drum mixes are more of a curiosity for me, but I do find them to be more quote unquote faithful to the original mixes. So perhaps those of you who are viewers who are looking for more of like a purist remix, like maybe Steven Wilson might do, that mix is maybe for you. But to me, they're a curiosity, and I heard them once, and I'm going to be reaching for the Atmos mixes from now on.
The Atmos mix is the way to hear this record.
Yeah.
So if you don't have an Atmos system, I would look into setting one up. And that I would say that at the end of any of our reviews. But for this album in particular, I feel like by not listening to it in surround, like you're really missing something.
Yeah. And not only that, and I know we're kind of trailing off topic here, but not only that, but folks who are going to buy this box set are probably have all of them already. So when you're thinking about, is it really worth buying a Atmos system just to hear one album? Well, it's worth buying one to hear all of the albums. And I know they're 5.1 mixes, but it's worth to hear all of the Tull albums.
Well, somehow I get the feeling that we're going to end up seeing a bunch of them come out in Atmos.
Yeah, but go see our other video from earlier this week.
Wouldn't that be funny if like this was the first one somebody bought in the series? Like, I've never heard of this band. Like, I want to buy some reissues. The first one I'm going to get is Unwrapped. That would be wild.
In our comments. Somebody in our comments is going to start with this one. But all right, Jonathan, thank you again. It's been really fun. And for those of you watching at home, leave us a comment below. Let us know if you're going to pick this up. And if you have already, let us know your impressions. We look forward to hearing from you. But until then, thanks again, Jonathan. And take care, my friend. It's been fun.
Always a pleasure.